Good evening. How's every... Seems a little far away. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. It's a little hot here, so pardon the... it's on low, the air conditioning in the background. Hopefully it does not interfere too much with the audio of the class. Who's in the house? Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, Guy in Ohio, Shandor in the Bronx, Renee in Indiana, Melissa in Great Neck, Bell in Texas, Yehud in South Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Alan in New York City, Ella in Southern California, Yosef in Sierra Nevada. Welcome, everybody. Our daf is page 41 here in Tractate Shevuos, the 26th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 6. Generally speaking, the oath of deposit. And today we're going to encounter a new oath that we have not seen before. We picked this up near the bottom, of page 40b. Yeah, probably like 3/4 of the way down. The Mishna teaches that if the claimant said, I have 100 dinars in your possession, which is the way the Talmud words something like, you owe me. Right? My 100 dinars are in your possession is to say, you owe me 100 dinars. So I have 100 dinars in your possession, and the defendant responded, nothing of yours is in my possession. So was that a partial admission? No, he's denying the claim entirely. So the defendant responded, nothing of yours is in my possession. In that situation, he is exempt from swearing an oath. Right? As we saw yesterday, when does somebody have to swear an oath? If I say you owe me money, right, and I can produce witnesses, a pair of witnesses, to establish the matter in court that you owe me money, then there's no oath. I win the litigation and you have to pay me. If I don't have the witnesses, but you say, listen, it's not that I owe you $100, I owe you 50. That's a partial admission. Then I can say to you, okay, swear that you know the 50 that you've already paid or whatever. When you say you only owe me 50, so you agree that you do owe 50. That's the partial admission, and then I can make you swear that you don't owe the rest. And if you're willing to take that oath, then you only have to owe me the 50. If I can produce one witness that you owe me 100 dinars, then that can also trigger you having to swear an oath that you don't owe me. Now, if you're willing to swear that oath, you don't have to pay. But here, it's not that I'm producing one witness, and there's no partial admission. I say you owe me, you say you don't. I have no evidence. I'm out of luck. I can't force you to swear an oath. However, this, what I've just said, is according to Torah law. The rabbis, owing to what was going on in this generation at the time that they felt an ordinance was necessary, passed an ordinance. So we've been talking about the oath on a deposit. Now we're going to talk about the oath of inducement, which is not by Torah law, but is by rabbinic law. So if I say, if the claimant says, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and the defendant says, nothing of yours is in my possession, he is exempt. Rav Nachman says, and the court administers an oath of inducement. This is an oath instituted by the sages to him, meaning that the defendant will have to swear an oath. It's not an oath by Torah law, but it is an oath by rabbinic law. And what is the reason? There is a presumption that one does not make a claim unless he has a valid case against the other party. Therefore, even though there is no admission to part of the claim, the defendant's denial should be examined through an oath. Now, you see that this is a context where, maybe the spiritual level of the nation has fallen somewhat, but there's enough righteousness in the people that we assume that somebody doesn't bring frivolous lawsuits. And that if he's going to bring a claim before the court that somebody owes him money, even though there's no witnesses, there's a presumption that there's something to this case. And now we impose this oath on him, administer an oath on him by rabbinic law. If he's willing to swear, no, I don't owe you anything, then he's excused. The oath is enough. But again, we're assuming that people don't swear oaths falsely because they're in awe of God and of Torah and the law. And they're not going to lie willy-nilly and swear an oath, which, as we've seen repeatedly, is a huge thing. Now, because it's an oath by rabbinic law, not by Torah law, we're not going to make him grasp a sacred object at the time that he's taking this oath. But I think they are going to adjure him and warn him and tell him that swearing falsely in the name of God is like taking the Lord's name in vain. And we've seen what a big, big sin with tremendous ongoing consequences that is. Right? And throughout this whole section that we're reading here, I mean, we're going to be talking about money and debt and when somebody swears an oath and when they don't. But look at the underlying righteousness, the underlying awe and fear of God, right? Yiras Hashem, fear of sin, yiras chet, that people have, right? There's just an underlying righteousness. Now, I do think that the majority of people in the world have an underlying righteousness even today. Sadly, there are so many people who are just willing to say anything to get out of paying or to win money. There certainly are frivolous lawsuits brought all the time. There's a lot of people who are not righteous at all. But I would like to believe that most people are decent and would be impressed in the sense that, you know, they're not going to swear before God in an offhand and cavalier manner. But let's keep reading. So there's a presumption that one does not make a claim unless he has a valid case against the other party, and therefore, even though there is no admission to part of the claim, the defendant's denial should be examined through an oath, and this is called the oath of inducement, which is by rabbinic law. So the Gemara objects. On the contrary, there is a presumption that a person does not exhibit insolence by lying in the presence of his creditor to deny the entire debt. Therefore, the defendant's denial of the entire claim suggests that he is telling the truth. So why are we going to make him swear an oath that is not by Torah law? And the Gemara answers that a debtor's categorical denial is not necessarily out of insolence, right? He's willing to tell a lie brazenly that he owes nothing when the guy that lent him money, and remember that all loans between Jews are without interest. So if somebody lends you money, they did you a big favor. And now you're going to say, right, in front of a court and in front of the person who lent you that money when you were in a jam, that you owe nothing, right? That's why this idea of brazenness and insolence comes into it. But however, there might be a reason that is not brazenness and insolence where somebody would deny that he owes a debt, even in the face of his creditor. So the Gemara answers that a debtor's categorical denial is not necessarily out of insolence. He may be temporarily avoiding paying his creditor. And he rationalizes doing so by saying to himself, I'm avoiding him only until the time that I have enough money, and then I will repay him. He's not really intending to steal the money that he borrowed. He's intending to repay it. He just can't repay right now. And he's willing to lie and say that there is no debt just to buy himself some time. This is very much, you see the psychology at work here, understanding the people of that time and place. And know, you should know, KNOW, know that denial of a debt is not considered an outright lie. As Rav Idi Bar Avin says, that Rav Chizda says, one who denies a claim with regard to a loan is fit to bear witness even if his denial is later proven untrue. And by contrast, one who denies a claim with regard to a deposit and is proven to be lying is disqualified from bearing witness. The distinction is clearly based on this aforementioned reasoning. A debtor who denies the debt may be avoiding payment until he has enough money, whereas a bailee who denies having been given a deposit clearly intends to steal the item. Right? So again, we're able to impute probable motives in these different scenarios. That, somebody who borrowed money and can't repay it right now might claim there's no loan just because he's stalling for time. But somebody who was paid or entrusted with the property of another and now claims that that property, he doesn't have it, and then it's proven later that he did have it when he said he didn't, that was a person who was trying to steal the property. There's a higher level of guilt in that case, and it impinges his credibility so much that he will not be trusted to be a witness in other people's cases. Rav Chaviva teaches Rav Nachman's statement as referring to the latter clause in the Mishnah. If one said to another, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and the latter said to him, yes, and the next day the claimant said to him, okay, so give the money to me. And the defendant responded, I already gave it to you. He is exempt. And Rav Nachman says, nevertheless, the court administers an oath of inducement to him. Right? Interesting case. Was there a partial admission or not? Right? It seems that on the day before, someone said, you owe me money, and the guy said yes. And then the next day said, okay, so pay me the money. And the guy says, I already paid it to you. It seems to be contradicting what he said the day before. Nevertheless, there has not been a partial admission nor a single witness brought forward that would trigger an oath of deposit. But using our new tool, the oath of inducement by rabbinic law, we would impose it in that situation. And the Gemara explains the difference between the two versions of Rav Nachman's statement. With regard to one who teaches it in reference to the former clause where the defendant denied the existence of the debt, all the more so does this Amora, this sage of the Gemara, agree that an oath of inducement is administered in the case of the latter clause where the defendant admitted to the existence of the debt and merely claimed that he had paid it. Now we're on page 41a. But the one who teaches it in reference to the latter clause maintains that specifically here, in this case, an oath of inducement is administered to the defendant as he admits that there is a matter of financial association between them. But there, in the case of the first clause, where the defendant maintains that the claim is completely baseless and he never owed anything, and there is no matter of financial association between them, the court does not administer an oath of inducement, according to this view, but the court does. New subject, the Gemara asks, practically speaking, what difference is there between an oath administered by Torah law, like the oath of deposit, and an oath administered by rabbinic law, like the oath of inducement? So the Gemara answers the practical difference between them is with regard to the transfer of an oath to the other party. What does that mean? In a case where the defendant suggests that instead of taking an oath himself, the claimant should take an oath and collect that which he claims. If the oath is administered by Torah law, we do not transfer the oath to the claimant. The defendant must either take an oath himself or pay. But if the oath is administered by rabbinic law, we do transfer the oath. Okay? So, oath of deposit. I say, you owe me $100. You say, I only owe you 50. I say, swear that you only owe 50, and then I will take the 50 and you won't have to pay. And you say, yeah, I don't like to swear oaths. Sal, if you want to swear an oath that I owe you the whole thing, then I'll pay the whole thing, the whole 100. And then it's up to me to be so sure that you owe me the 100 that I'm willing to swear an oath on it, and then you'll pay me, right? So that's transferring the oath. Normally, the defendant is the one who's in a situation where because a single witness came forward, not a pair of witnesses, or because there was partial admission, he's the one that's obligated to swear an oath, but he doesn't want to swear. So he says, all right, let the plaintiff swear, and then I'll pay. But if it's an oath of deposit, right, which is by Torah law, we don't transfer the oath. Either you swear or you pay the whole thing. But if it's an oath of inducement, where I say you owe me 100, you say you don't owe anything, the judges say, okay, swear the oath of inducement, right? In other words, if you're willing to swear that you owe nothing, you don't have to pay. and then you're like, I don't want to swear an oath. Make Sal swear. If Sal is willing to swear that I owe him $100, I'll pay the 100. So now the onus is on me. Am I willing to swear an oath? Right? Both of us take oaths seriously, and if I'm willing to swear, then you'll pay the 100. But in cases of rabbinic law, oath of inducement, you can do this transfer from the defendant to the plaintiff. In cases of Torah law, an oath of deposit, we don't make that transfer from the defendant to the plaintiff. The Gemara asks, and according to Mar Bar Rav Ashi, who says that we transfer an oath that is administered by Torah law as well. Also in the oath of deposit, we could transfer the oath. Minority view, but according to that view, who says that we do transfer an oath that is administered by Torah law as well, then what difference is there between an oath administered by Torah law and an oath administered by rabbinic law? And the Gemara answers the practical difference between them is with regard to whether or not the court enters the property of the defendant to collect payment if he refuses to take an oath. And with regard to an oath administered by Torah law, we enter his property and seize. Right? We enter his house or his real property, and we seize the movable property to pay the debt. And with regard to an oath administered by rabbinic law, we do not enter his property. And the Gemara asks, and what is the practical difference according to Rabbi Yosei, who says that even with regard to a debt that is owed by rabbinic law, we enter the property of the debtor to collect the debt. So now, what is the difference between an oath by rabbinic law and an oath by Torah law? And says the Gemara, as we learned in the Mishna on Tractate Gittin, page 59b, a lost item found by a deaf-mute, an imbecile, or a minor is not acquired by him since he lacks the legal competence to effect acquisition. Nevertheless, taking such an item from him is considered robbery on account of the ways of peace. Although these individuals lack halachic competence and are unable to acquire lost items by Torah law, taking such items from them is considered robbery. And Rabbi Yosei says this is not just robbery due to the ways of peace, this is full-fledged robbery. And Rav Chisda says that Rabbi Yosei means that it is full-fledged robbery by rabbinic law. Accordingly, what is the practical difference between the opinion of the first Tana and Rabbi Yosei's opinion there? The difference is that according to Rabbi Yosei, if one refuses to return the stolen item, it is appropriated by the judges and returned to the one who found it, even though he was an imbecile, a minor, or a deaf-mute who could not legally acquire. We enter the property of the one who took it from him and return it to that other person who initially found it. And now the Gemara completes its question. Since, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, the court enters one's property to appropriate even an item that is owed by rabbinic law, what difference is there between an oath administered by Torah law and an oath administered by rabbinic law? And the Gemara answers the practical difference between them is with regard to a case where the one opposing the claimant, i.e. the defendant, is suspected with regard to oaths. He has taken an oath in the past that we are not sure that he was telling the truth or not. He is suspect. He might be a person who's willing to lie under oath, so we don't want to remove property based on this person taking an oath because he is suspect when it comes to oaths. With regard to an oath administered by Torah law, if the one opposing the claimant is suspected with regard to oaths, we transfer the obligation to take an oath and impose it on the other litigant, i.e. the claimant, who may take an oath and collect that which he claims that he is owed. But with regard to an oath that is administered by rabbinic law, like the oath of inducement, the court does not transfer the oath. Why? Because transference of an oath from the defendant to the plaintiff, making that transfer is done by rabbinic law. And we do not institute one rabbinic ordinance upon another rabbinic ordinance. This is why, even though we've had a lot of laws added over the millennia since the Torah was given, we don't add laws on top of laws, right? So when the sages institute an ordinance, it's to protect us from coming to violate a Torah law. They don't institute a rabbinic ordinance to protect us from coming to violate another rabbinic ordinance, because then the laws could really multiply completely out of control. And we have a principle that we don't establish a rabbinic law in order to ensure compliance with a different rabbinic law. And the Gemara asks, and according to the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yosei, as they say that with regard to an item that is owed by rabbinic law, we do not enter his property to collect the item. What do we do to one who refuses to take an oath of inducement? All right, let's get back to the original case. I say you owe me $100. You say, I don't owe you anything. I don't have a partial admission from you. I don't have a single witness that I can come to force you to take an oath. I can't force you to take an oath on a deposit. But we have the rabbinic law of an oath of inducement, where since I am willing to come to court and claim that you owe me that $100, now the court will say to you, okay, swear the oath of inducement that you don't owe the $100 and you don't have to pay, but you have to swear the oath of inducement. And what if you say, yeah, no, I don't owe Sal, and I won't take the oath of inducement? Now you're refusing to comply, right, with an oath that's being administered to you according to rabbinic law by the judges of a rabbinic court. What do we do then? The Gemara answers, we excommunicate him until he takes an oath. In other words, you're saying that you're not going to participate in our legal system. We're like, well, okay, then you're going to suffer the consequences of not participating in the legal system of our community, because you're going to be excommunicated from our community. And that means that no one in our community will do business with you. It's a big deal to be excommunicated, particularly when you think about diaspora Jewish communities over the thousands of years, where the Jewish community stuck together and protected each other because they were very vulnerable in these larger countries. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, and if the Jews couldn't rely on each other, but they would be hated and despised by the regular the non-Jews in that country, this is a very dangerous and vulnerable place to be. And so this is why, when Spinoza was excommunicated in Amsterdam for his heretical views, it was a big deal. He was willing to be excommunicated because he believed in his views, but he was very much an apikoros, and he paid a price for that. So let's keep going. We excommunicate him until he takes the oath. So Ravina said to Rav Ashi, this sanction is no less severe than entering his property and collecting the debt. It is like grabbing him by his testicles until he surrenders his cloak. Right? Excommunication is a really big deal. Why not just take the property? Rather, what do we do to him? Rav Ashi said, we excommunicate him until the time to flog him comes, i.e. for 30 days. And if he still refuses to take an oath or reach a settlement with the claimant, we flog him and then we leave him alone. We're not going to permanently excommunicate someone because he won't take an oath on a debt that is claimed from him. We will temporarily excommunicate him for 30 days, then say, swear the oath. He says, no. Say, we're going to flog you if you don't swear the oath. He says, fine, flog me. We flog him, and then he's done. He's suffered enough. He was excommunicated for 30 days. He was flogged. He doesn't have to pay the debt, and he doesn't have to swear the oath of inducement. And that is the law. New subject. Rav Papa said, with regard to one who produced a promissory note against another in court, so at the time that they made the loan, they signed the promissory note in front of witnesses. This is much stronger evidence than just an oral claim that somebody owes you money. Promissory note is the way it's supposed to be done. So, with regard to one who produced a promissory note against another in court, and the defendant said to him, the debt in the note is already paid. Yes, I borrowed money from you, as is written up in that promissory note, but I paid it back. Well, if you paid it back, why does the plaintiff still have the promissory note? When you paid it back, you should have got the promissory note in return and torn it up so that this wouldn't happen. What's going on? The defendant said to him, the debt in the note is already paid. But for some reason, I did not get the promissory note returned to me when I paid you. Right? He says, he saw him one day, he says, here's the money I owe you. please send me the promissory note. And the lender said, oh, no problem, I'll send it to you. And then he never did. And then a year goes by, and then he finds the promissory. He's like, he forgot that he was paid. He sees the promissory note, so now he brings it again and wants to get paid. He doesn't remember that he was already paid. The defendant remembers that he did pay, but he didn't get the promissory note. That's why you want to follow procedure properly. He didn't. So what do? We say to the defendant, it is not in your power to deny the debt. You should have got the promissory note back. Now that there's a promissory note against you and you can't prove that you paid it, pay it again. Pay it. But if the defendant said, let him, the lender, take an oath to me that I did not repay him, then we say to the claimant, take an oath. Because now what have we done? When the guy says, well, I don't have evidence, but I know I paid you. So if you think that I didn't pay you, swear that I didn't pay you. We've reversed who's got money in whose hands, right? Since the lender, who has already been repaid, according to the borrower, is now claiming that he wasn't paid, it's now, he's saying, well, swear that you weren't paid. It's like the former borrower is now saying, I have money in your possession. And if you don't think I do, swear, right? He has turned it around, and now he's making the holder of the promissory note swear that he hasn't already been repaid. And you know what? He can do that. And the court will then turn to say, okay, you, the holder of the promissory note, swear the oath of inducement. If you are sure that you have not been paid, okay, now this borrower will pay you. According to him, he'll pay you for a second time, but he will pay you. But you have to swear. And if the holder of the note is not willing to take that oath, then the one who originally borrowed money under that note will not have to pay. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, but what is the difference between this case and the case of one who vitiates his promissory note? What is vitiate? It's like weakening the note. This is a lender who's holding a promissory note and who acknowledges that he has received partial payment, right? So he's willing to accept less to fulfill the promissory note. In the latter case, the sages instituted that the creditor can collect the remainder of the debt only after taking an oath that he was not repaid more than the amount that he admitted to receiving. He admits that he's received partial payment. He's going to have to swear an oath that what he said is true. And then he can collect the rest. Okay, that's the case of vitiating a promissory note. According to Rav Papa, an oath can be administered to any creditor who produces a promissory note, even if he did not vitiate it. Right? What we've seen in this other law is that you can make the creditor, the lender, you can only make him swear the oath of inducement if he admits that he's received partial payment. But in the absence of that, you can't make him swear. But in the case we just had, they could make him swear. So what's going on? Rav Ashi said to him, there in the case of a creditor who vitiated his promissory note, even if the defendant does not himself make a claim demanding that the creditor take an oath, we, the court, make such a claim on his behalf. Here, in a case where the creditor did not vitiate his promissory note, we say to the defendant, go pay him the debt. But if the defendant demands an oath, we don't advise him to do this, but if he demands it, saying, take an oath to me, then we turn to the creditor and say to him, go take an oath to him. But if he is a Torah scholar, we do not administer such an oath to him. Rav Yemar said to Rav Ashi, can a Torah scholar uncloak people? Does his being a Torah scholar give him the right to collect money that the defendant claims he does not owe? Rather, if he is a Torah scholar, we do not attend to his case. We do not attend to his case. If the creditor is a Torah scholar, the court does not administer an oath to him, nor does it deem the debtor liable to pay. But if the creditor seizes property from the defendant for his debt, the court does not appropriate it from him either. And if he wishes to take an oath so that the debtor will be deemed liable to pay, he has the right to do so. New subject. The Mishna teaches that if the claimant said, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and the defendant initially acknowledged the debt, But when he claimed the money the next day, the defendant said that he had already paid him. The defendant is exempt from taking an oath. So Rabbi Yehuda says that Rav Asi says, in the case of one who lends money to another in the presence of witnesses, the latter is required to pay him in the presence of witnesses. Therefore, if there are no witnesses to the fact that he repaid him, he is liable. And Rabbi Yehuda continues, when I said this in the presence of Shmuel, he said to me that the debtor can say to the claimant, I repaid you in the presence of so-and-so and so-and-so, and then they went overseas. So the Gemara raised an objection to Rav Asi's statement. We learned in the Mishnah that in a case where the claimant said, I have 100 dinars in your possession, right, which is to say you owe me 100 dinars, and the defendant said to him, yes, he acknowledges that he owes him 100 dinars, or at least that he borrowed it, because the next day when the claimant says, pay me my 100 dinars, and the defendant says, I already gave it to you. I admitted that I borrowed from you yesterday, and today when you're asking for the money, I'm telling you, what are you talking about? I already paid you back. Right? So he acknowledged that there was a loan. He's not denying it entirely. He just acknowledged that there once was a loan, but now he's claiming he already paid it back. Right? If the defendant responded, I already gave it to you, he is exempt. He doesn't have to swear an oath and he doesn't have to pay. So the Gemara infers, and here, since the claimant claimed the debt from the defendant in the presence of witnesses, and the latter admitted the debt, he is similar to one who lent him the money in the presence of witnesses. And nevertheless, the Mishnah teaches that the defendant is exempt. So evidently, he is not required to repay him in the presence of witnesses. And the Gemara suggests this is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Asi. Right? Can the claimant can the claimant require that the borrower repay his loan in the presence of witnesses? Can he require that? And where the defendant just shows up and says, look, here's the money. I'm not going to wait around for you to have witnesses. Take the money. I'm done. Right? But then later, if he gets sued again because the lender forgot, right, that he was repaid, and then he later ran into his witnesses who said, did that guy ever pay you back when we were watching that you lent him money? And he's like, no, I don't think he did. Let's go have him pay me back. And the guy says, what are you talking about? I paid you back. It wasn't in the presence of witnesses, but I paid you back. So can the plaintiff then say, listen, when I lent you the money, it was in the presence of witnesses, and I either said explicitly or it was implied in the strongest possible terms that since I lent you in the presence of witnesses, I expect it to be repaid in the presence of witnesses. So your story that you repaid me at some point when the witnesses were not around, I don't buy it. Can we make that argument as a lender? The Gemara says, Rav Asi could have said to you, when I said that the debtor is liable to repay him in the presence of witnesses, it was with regard to a case where the creditor lent the money to him in the presence of witnesses at the outset, as he did not trust him. But here, he trusted him at the outset and made a loan without witnesses. Therefore, the debtor is not required to pay the debt in the presence of witnesses. So it sounds like Rav Asi would say, if the loan was initially made in the presence of two witnesses, it needs to be repaid in the presence of two witnesses. If the loan was not initially made in the presence of witnesses, it does not need to be repaid in the presence of witnesses. Rav Yosef teaches another version of this discussion, like so. Rav Yehuda says that Rav Asi says, in the case of one who lends money to another in the presence of witnesses, the latter need not repay him in the presence of witnesses. But if the creditor said, repay me only in the presence of witnesses, then the debtor is required to repay him in the presence of witnesses. And Rav Yehuda continued, when I said this in the presence of Shmuel, he said to me that the debtor can say to the claimant, I repaid you in the presence of witnesses, so and so and so and so, but now they're not available to testify about it because they left the country. And we are going to accept the argument as the point of Shmuel. So the Gemara raised an objection against Shmuel's opinion. We learned in the Mishnah that in a case where the claimant said, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and the defendant said to him, yes, right? He admitted that there was a loan and that he had not paid it back yet. And the claimant then said to him, okay, give me my money back, but give it to me only in the presence of witnesses. And then if the next day the claimant said to him, give the money to me, and the defendant replied, I already gave it to you, he is liable to pay, as he is required to give it to him in the presence of witnesses. And the Gemara suggests this is a conclusive refutation of Shmuel. So if when you say pay me back, you can only pay me back in the presence of witnesses, and the guy claims he already paid back, then we're going to say no. Even if you did pay, it counts as not paying because you were told you can only repay in the presence of witnesses, and you did not do that. You can't bring those witnesses now, so you still owe the money. So the Gemara answers, Shmuel could have said to you that it is a dispute between Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah. As it is taught in a Baraisa, if the creditor said to the debtor, I lent the money to you in the presence of witnesses, and therefore you must repay me in the presence of witnesses, then the debtor must either give him the money or bring proof that he already gave it to him. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says that he can say to him, I repaid you in the presence of so and so and so and so, and they subsequently went overseas. And Rav Acha refutes this answer. From where is it derived that the Baraisa is referring to a case where the creditor said this requirement to pay in the presence of witnesses at the time that the loan was extended? Perhaps it is referring to a case where he made no stipulation about repayment in front of witnesses at the time that the loan was made, but rather said this at the time of the claim, when the debtor claimed that he had repaid the debt. And this is what he says to him. Didn't I lend the money to you in the presence of witnesses? You should have repaid me in the presence of witnesses. But if he made this stipulation at the time of the loan, yes, then all agree that the debtor is liable if he did not repay at the time in the presence of witnesses. Therefore, there is no evidence that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira agrees with the opinion of Shmuel. And in conclusion, Rav Papi says in the name of Rava, the law is that if one lends money to another in the presence of witnesses, the borrower is required to repay him in the presence of witnesses. And Rav Papa says in the name of Rava, in the case of one who lends money to another in the presence of witnesses, the latter is not required to repay him in the presence of witnesses. But if the creditor says, repay me only in the presence of witnesses, then the debtor is required to repay him in the presence of witnesses. And if he said to him, I repaid you in the presence of so and so and so and so, and they went overseas, then his claim would be deemed credible. Now, the Gemara cites several incidents involving loans and witnesses and provides a mnemonic device for them to help us remember these series of cases. Reuven and Shimon, who learned law, borrowed, repaid, so-and-so, and so-and-so, gallnuts from a different debt, deeming them credible like two witnesses. That was just a series of phrases to help us remember what's coming. Now, a few incidents. Let's put these principles that we've been learning today into practice, as it were. This is how the sages actually ruled in real cases. So there was a certain creditor who said to the debtor, when you repay me in the presence of Reuven and Shimon. So he didn't just say, when you repay me in the presence of witnesses. He said, when you repay me in the presence of two specific people, Reuven and Shimon. Well, when the time came for repayment, the debtor went and repaid him in the presence of two other people. There were two witnesses, but it wasn't Reuven and Shimon. When the case was brought before the sages, Abaye said, the creditor said to the debtor to repay him in the presence of two people who would serve as witnesses, and you repaid him in the presence of two people. Therefore, the creditor has no further claim. Doesn't matter that he said it has to be Reuven and Shimon. The fact is, the borrower can now produce witnesses who are not disqualified, credible witnesses, who say, we saw this guy pay that money to the lender in order to repay the debt. Why does it have to be Reuven and Shimon to do that? But Rava said to him, it is for this reason that the creditor said to him to repay him in the presence of Reuven and Shimon, so that he will not be able to dismiss him by saying that he repaid him in the presence of other witnesses. In other words, the creditor, at the time of making the loan, said, I'm lending you this money on the condition that when you repay me, it has to be done in the presence of Reuven and Shimon. Why? Because maybe he knew that Reuven and Shimon weren't going to go away. Whereas these other two witnesses, it might have been done in front of them, and then they go away, and then the guy can't produce them, and he's going to claim, well, I paid you, and my witnesses went away, but I'll swear an oath, or I'll make you swear an oath, and the lender didn't want to get involved in that. So he wanted specific witnesses, and so according to Rava, he wasn't repaid, according to the condition that he made at the time of the loan, and which the borrower agreed to. Now Gemara relates another incident. There was a certain creditor who said to the debtor, when you repay me in the presence of two people who have learned halacha, right? So people who are learned, who know what the laws, the Torah laws and the rabbinic laws of borrowing and lending are. Right? Doesn't necessarily have to be a sage, doesn't necessarily have to be a judge, but it's somebody who is learned in this body of law. And the debtor went and repaid him between the two of them, i.e. in the absence of any witnesses. Those dinars were subsequently taken from the creditor due to circumstances beyond his control. So the creditor came before Rav Nachman for judgment and said to him, yes, I received the money from him. But since he did not repay me as stipulated, I accepted it only as a deposit. I accepted it as an unpaid bailee, not as payment, and said to myself, let it be with me as a deposit until two people who have learned halacha happen to arrive, and the debtor will fulfill the condition. Since the money was taken from me due to circumstances beyond my control, and I had it in my possession as an unpaid bailee, I am not responsible for it, and the debtor is still liable to repay me. Now, this is a good argument, right? The creditor is saying, I made a very specific stipulation at the time of lending you the money. You came, you didn't give it to me in the presence of the witnesses that I asked for. So I assume that, okay, I'm just holding it as a deposit until you can bring two such witnesses, and then I'll say, yeah, this is the deposit. I am now accepting it as repayment of the debt. Until then, I'm just holding this deposit as an unpaid bailee. Now, an unpaid bailee has certain responsibilities, but it's the lowest level of responsibility. So that if something beyond his control happens, he's not liable to make it good. Therefore, according to this argument, and it seems a good one, the borrower still owes the money. So what happened? Rav Nachman said to him, since you admit that you certainly took the money from him, it is a proper repayment. If you say that the debtor is still required to fulfill his condition, go bring the money now. As Rav Sheshes and I have learned halacha, and Sifra, and Sifrei, and Tosefta, and the entire Talmud, so let him give you the money in our presence, and the condition will thereby be fulfilled. Since he gave you the money, and his intent was certainly to repay the debt, and he did not agree to entrust it to you as an unpaid bailee, your claim is not valid. And that's why knowing the halacha is so vital in these kinds of cases. What sounded logical was not legal. The Gemara relates, there was a certain person who said to another, give me the 100 dinars that I lent you. And the latter said to him, this matter never happened. You did not lend me money. So the creditor went and brought witnesses who testified that he did lend money to him and that the debtor had repaid him. Okay, so what happened here? I said, you owe me $100. You say, I don't owe you anything. I bring witnesses. The witnesses come and say, yeah, Sal lent you $100, and Sal, he paid you back the $100. So it sounds like you don't owe me anything, and now we've established it through the testimony of witnesses. So what's going to happen? Abaye said, what is there for the court to do in this case? The same witnesses said both statements. They said that the creditor lent him the money, and they also said that the debtor repaid him. Rava said, anyone who says, I did not borrow, is considered like one who says, I did not repay. Since there is testimony that he borrowed the money, and he admits that he did not repay it, all right, because he started by saying, I don't owe you anything, so he certainly did not admit that he paid already, that he repaid. He initially said, I didn't borrow at all, but now we brought witnesses who say he did borrow. According to Rava, he is liable to pay. Be careful who you mess with and what lies you're telling. The Gemara relates, there was a certain person who said to another, I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. There was a certain person who said to another, give me the 100 dinars that I claim from you. And the latter said to him, didn't I repay you in the presence of Reuben and Shimon? The two people that he mentioned, Reuben and Shimon, came and said, the matter never happened. Rav Sheshes thought to say that based on the testimony of the witnesses, the debtor assumes the presumptive status of one who falsely denies his debts. His claim that he repaid the debt is no longer accepted, and he is liable to repay. But Rava said to him, which is like what Rava said in the previous case, but now there's an additional wrinkle, and Rava's like, no, you still got it wrong. Rava said to him, anything that is not incumbent upon a person is not on his mind, i.e. he is apt to forget it. And that's why he forgot that, he paid or didn't pay. He's not going to become somebody that we are suspect of taking oaths and is going to be disqualified from being a witness. Another case. The Gemara relates, there was a certain person who said to another, give me the 600 dinars that I claim from you. And the latter said to him, but didn't I repay you with 100 kav of gall nuts? Right? You owe me $600. You say, wait a minute, I paid you back. I didn't give you $600, but I gave you $600 worth of gall nuts. Right? It was 100 kav that were worth 6 dinars for each kav at the time. Right? So it would be 600 dinars worth of gall nuts. The creditor said to him, wait a minute. Weren't they worth 4 dinars per kav at that time? So what you paid me is 400 dinars. You still owe me 200. Two witnesses came and said, yes, the creditor is correct. They were worth 4 dinars at that time per kav. So presumably the creditor paid 400 of the 600 and still owes 200 dinars. Rava said that the debtor assumes the presumptive status of one who falsely denies his debts. Rami Bar Chama said, but didn't you say that anything that is not incumbent upon a person is not on his mind? Perhaps he merely forgot what the price of gall nuts was at that time. And Rava said to him, people remember the standard set market price, especially when they're using that price to pay off a debt. They would remember that. And the fact that he's claiming he didn't remember and he's trying to get away with something. So we're going to say that this is someone who now has the status of denying his debts, and his credibility will be impinged in the future. That's where we'll knock off. Let me take a couple of questions. Bill, hypothetical case. Alex claims that Bob owes him money. Bob says he owes no such thing. The court demands Bob swear the oath of inducement. Bob refuses because he's only 99% sure that he's never taken any money from Alex, and Bob is too pious to swear an oath unless he's 100% sure. Very good. But Bob also refuses to try and reverse the oath on Alex because he and Alex have done business in the past, and he learned during that prior business that Alex was a very mercenary and impious individual, and Bob is fearful that Alex would swear falsely for gain. What should Bob do? Just take his month's excommunication and flogging and get on with it? Or pay? Right? And he doesn't want to swear the oath because he's so pious. I mean, it's a lot. So I guess what you're asking me, or you're asking Bob, is it worth it to you to be excommunicated for a month and flogged in order to not pay this debt that you don't want to swear because you're not 100% sure? I suspect that somebody who's that pious is going to have a long think about it, because it's, being excommunicated, it's very bad to be separate from the community for that month. And being flogged is very bad because it's painful. But I think much worse than being separated for a month and worse than being flogged is being known as someone who was excommunicated and being known as someone who was flogged, because that will last forever. And to avoid that, I think he'll either pay. He's the one who's being claimed against. On the other hand, if he's going to be forced to pay anyway, rather than suffer the excommunication and the flogging, then he might as well transfer the oath and say, I'm not going to swear that oath. If he's willing to swear the oath, I'll pay. And now, if Alex is willing to swear that oath, and Bob thinks that he's a mercenary, crook who's willing to lie and take a false oath that way, well, he's no worse off for having to pay the money than he would be otherwise. And he's made this other person swear falsely, which maybe, first of all, he won't do it, because we don't know for sure that he's so mercenary and criminally minded. And if he is, and he swears falsely, maybe one day he'll repent of that. And if he doesn't, any of those two things don't happen, at least, he'll be held accountable in heaven for that, whereas Bob behaved correctly. That's how I would understand this situation. Joe, when bringing two different witnesses, can it be held that Simon and Reuben were not used because they've developed unsavory reputation? I mean, that's why it's sort of like related issues. Does somebody who's earned a reputation for swearing falsely, it means that he's disqualified from being a witness. So if you know that these guys are disqualified from being witnesses and you use them as your witnesses because you want to get away with something, that's very impious and improper behavior. That really rises to the level of criminality if it can be proven. Maybe that's a big ask, but it's a great question. And Sharon, so many of these conditions are he said. Weren't any of these conditions ever written with the witnesses? I mean, I think they should have been, right? So many cases never came before the court because the people followed those procedures properly. They made the loan in the presence of witnesses. They wrote it down. And so everyone knows exactly where they stand. And probably that's the way it was done in 99.999% of the cases. But where they didn't do that, because they were just, casual, or it was between friends, or they didn't think about it, they didn't want to hire, a rabbi or a lawyer to help them do it properly. That's how they end up in the situation that the judges have to litigate, and that's why we're reading about it. Right? Generally speaking, we're always reading about exceptional cases. The common cases were dealt with easily according to Torah law, and don't need to be studied later. That's what I've got for us, and with God's help, we're together again tomorrow, Wednesday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.